Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock. I'm going to give us just a few more minutes for people to join in, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I hope that everyone is able to hear me. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Sanford Keller. I'm a speech pathologist and a faculty member at the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Oregon Health and Science University here in Portland, Oregon. And we are so excited to have you here with us for the second webinar in our three-part webinar collaboration with Community Vision, focusing on complex access and communication for emerging communicators. So I'm going to go ahead and just get us started. Of course, we have to begin with our first slide announcing any financial disclosures. None of our speakers or our planning committee have any financial relationships to disclose. And so I like to start with just a few housekeeping items. We're going to have everyone stay muted during the presentation with the videos off. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. You can utilize the chat box or unmute yourself to ask a question. We'll also have time dedicated at the end for any discussion and questions you may have. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting this webinar on our website. And at the end of the webinar, we're asking everyone who is joining us today to complete a short survey. That is also the link that you will utilize to receive any CME or speech pathology continuing education hours. I'm going to go ahead and just get us started by introducing our two experts today, our speakers. We have with us Kim Elliott and Carrie Luce. Kim has worked on the assistive technology team at Randall Children's Hospital. She also worked with adults at Oregon Health and Science University, serving clients with ALS, Parkinson's, stroke, neurodegenerative diseases, and developmental disabilities. Along with two colleagues, she began Assistive Technology Northwest, a private practice where she focused on developing communication supports for children and adults with complex communication needs in a variety of settings. She is now co-director of the Community Vision Assistive Technology Lab in Southeast Portland. We also have Carrie Luce. Carrie is a certified assistive technology professional. She specializes in communication access, seating and mobility, and sensory integration. Her true passion is working with and learning from people with complex communication, mobility, and medical needs. She worked for almost 10 years at the Children's Hospital at Legacy Emmanuel in Portland, Oregon, and was part of multiple interdisciplinary clinical teams. She has served children and adults through her private practice at Assistive Technology Northwest, as well as consulting at the Providence Neurodevelopmental Center for Children and the Child Center. Carrie is now co-directing the Assistive Technology Lab at Community Vision. Both Carrie and Kim present regionally and nationally on a variety of topics, and we are very pleased to have them with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kim and Carrie.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I just wanted to let you know the Assistive Technology Lab that Carrie and I co-direct is in Portland, Oregon, and in addition, it's a nonprofit resource and education center, and we do have some open lab hours, but in addition, we have a free call and email center, so anyone from the region or across the country, anywhere really can contact us with any questions. We're really happy to to help. And so at the end of this, we'll actually have our contact information posted up on a slide for a while if any of you are looking for that information. And we're really happy to be here with the USED this morning. And we are excited to talk about complex communication and complex access and introduce the PAL approach. So just to frame the session, how we're going to organize it this morning is we're just going to do a brief overview of communicative competence using AAC, and then we'll explain the components and rationale for our PAL approach and discuss the importance of participation in the developmental process. And then we found it best, we're going to just elaborate on the components of PAL within case studies, and then we'll have a recap and questions at the end. There is another session, a third session, and I wanted you to all know that we're going to dig into the specific tools and strategies in next month's webinar. So if you feel like we're breezing over a few tools or you have some questions, we're going to dig in a little more next time. All right, so let's talk about communicative competence. We all are developing it over all of our lives, and basically it's two parts to it. It's knowledge of the language, so vocabulary and grammar, so that actual linguistic knowledge. But then to really be a competent communicator, you need to be able to use it in real life, in functional situations, and those are more those social skills and understanding how to use language effectively. And really, it's a lifelong journey. If you think about yourself when you were about 16 years old compared to now, linguistically, you probably don't have that much more. You might have a little more vocabulary. If you went to grad school, maybe you refined some of those linguistic skills. But really, what happens over a lifetime is we learn more and more how to become effective communicators. At least we hope that's what we were doing. And so that's just an overview of communicative competence for all of us. For AAC, there are extra demands because there is an external device, right? A machine to operate. So or a book or a set of symbols or whatever tool you're using, it's an extra thing, a component to add to your communicative competence. So like everyone else, you still need the knowledge of the language, the ability to use it in real life, but now you also have this other component, which is that sort of visual motor operation of the machine. We're going to talk about the machine today. There are obviously lots of AAC tools that are not high-tech or machine. Those are still, tools to be learned and to operate, but specifically today we're going to be looking at those high-tech tools when we're talking about access. So lots to learn, and again, it's a lifelong journey. And so the PAL approach really is looking at these three areas of communicative competence, and a lot of this work around AAC comes from Janice Light and her colleagues at Penn State. Years ago, they talked about the communicative competence of AAC users. There's another component here called strategic that she talks about. We're not going to address that today. We're really looking at the linguistic, social, and operational and how that relates to our PAL approach. So what is PAL? It stands for participation, access, and language. And so participation is that sort of those opportunities to use these tools in real life. So really kind of supporting that social skill growth. And access is the operation of those tools, whatever they may be. And we might call it, the machine or lots of other AAC tools. That's the access. And then language is that knowledge of words, grammar, and meaning. And we really need all three of these to work together to be competent communicators. And so why do we use this approach? For our kiddos who have some physical or complex access challenges, it can take a while to figure that out. There's lots of layers between vision and hearing and motor patterns, etc. So access can be challenging, but we don't want to wait until all of that is figured out before we really work on those language skills. So we need to introduce those and start developing those language skills early. And then participation, of course, we need to be participating in our lives, right? That is the motivating, fun part of life, is participating. And so we don't want to wait for both the access and the language skills to develop before we introduce participation. And importantly, participation really lays the foundation for language and social skills. And so that's actually why we ordered it. We called it PAL, not LAP or ELP, because participation is, you can start on day one with participation, which is an exciting thing if you're working with kids to have a place to start. So, and most importantly, participation, because it's so engaging, right? We communicate when we're engaged. So it's really important both as a foundation for developing communication skills, but also it really is the thread through all of these things, right? Access is important so that you can participate. Language is important so you can participate. So it's both the foundation and that thread that connects all the pieces throughout our lives. I got this graphic from a parent, which I really loved. I saw her a few years ago doing a presentation. She was talking about her son, and she didn't have any formal training on AAC or communication, but she came up with this lovely image, and she really built her communication house, ends up being a multimodal AAC house. And so her son uses a bit of sign language, some spoken word, some iPad and pictures, some of those traditional AAC tools, and then also gesture and body language. And she said, these are the frames that make my son's communication house, but the way to enter his house is through engagement. And I just think this is a really fabulous graphic, kind of helps us understand the role of engagement. So I'm going to launch in. That's the overview of PAL. We've really found the best way to explain it is to just dig into the case studies. So this morning you're going to meet 3 young people, Stella, Weston, and Julie, and we will explain the PAL process we all went through together and where they are today. So I'd like to introduce you to Stella. Stella, I think she started to see Carrie and a colleague of mine when she was 2. She has cerebral palsy. She has significant cortical vision impairment. She has seizures that are thankfully under control. And she is a delightful, fun young woman who is now 8, 9, yeah, anyways, so here is just introducing participation. This is actually a picture of her when she was a little bit older, but she was introduced to a step-by-step, first off, when she was just a wee one, as a way to participate. It's a little voice output device where you can just program sequential messages. And her mom, and she would do it for news and stories. When she was little, she did it for songs, or, you know, to just have some fun with her parents. But her mom, she's not in her costume, but this is on Halloween night. She programmed and she showed Stella what she would be able to do when they went out trick-or-treating. So it just says trick or treat. I think there's a second message that says Happy Halloween. Super simple tool. It does not have to be a really complex thing, but she gets to, along with her brother and friends when trick or treating, gets to also say that with a simple device like this. And like I said, she has a step-by-step and has used it for a variety of things for many years now. Also for participation, her mom actually learned this from another parent, which I thought was fabulous, is just using a fan that is activated by her switch to blow out her birthday candles. So again, really simple, but she gets to participate in her birthday blowing or cake blowing part of her birthday. And some people might think, well, isn't that access? Because we look at devices like this and we might think of it as access. You could make this into an access fun game if you had, let's say, a pretend birthday party and you had lots of, say, stuffed animals or other friends and you were pretending it was their birthday and you were doing sort of multiple blowing out the candles. But for just something like this, it's just a simple way for her to participate in her birthday celebration. So for access for Stella early on, it was Carrie had identified that she was likely going to be a switch access user. And so they were trying to determine which switch sites were going to be best. And so just play-based, having fun activities that she enjoyed on the iPad. She had two switch activities that she just did lots of fun play with. And it was one of her favorite things to do. And I just wanted to make a note about modeling access. A lot of us are familiar with the term modeling when it comes to language, but we don't always think of it when it comes to access. So we wouldn't just throw a setup like this up for a child and say, okay, because it's fun, you'll be able to figure it all out. It's still operating a machine, right? So we would model what the game is and how you make it kind of go, or how you make it work. And then she would be able to learn her access and just have fun that way but remembering to model. And so in addition, in those early access years, she would be able to she was making choices through yes, no buttons. Again, it might seem like it's language because we're going through a list of words, but really it's just simple choice making. There's obviously a language component there, but it's just play-based, and it's a way for her to also work on those switch movements while making choices throughout her play. And so I don't know if all of you are familiar with the yes, no, and how that relates to scanning, but the no is just the equivalent of saying, no, not that one. No, not that one. Yes, that's the one I want. So it's not answering yes, no questions, but it's just scanning through fun choices that are very familiar. And so and again, we modeled that first, and she loved participating in that and really did great learning those movements. And again, we at first modeled it. So here's an example of Carrie modeling with the yes, no buttons to scan through choices. The video got clipped, so we don't have the whole script out there, but her preamble was, let me see, what do I want to do? Could read a book, play with the beach ball, or do something else. And then you will see she's done book, and she's going to scan through and show. And we did this video because her preschool team wanted to be able to model, and they just needed themselves to see a model of modeling to see how it worked. So you'll see her modeling that. Oops. Let's try that again.
No. Play with a ball. Yeah, I want to play with the beach ball.
So you can see she's modeling how those yes, no buttons work early on, and then Stella learned it and rocked it for many years. In the meantime, while she was doing lots of participation, working on her access and those switch sites and learning how to operate machines, we wanted to make sure we introduced a good, robust language system to her. So we started with an auditory scanning book, and all that means is we didn't pair it with symbols because of Stella's particular cortical vision impairment. Symbols were not useful for her. In fact, if anything, might be a distraction if she, was trying to focus on them. So she just had an auditory scanning book. It's loosely based on a kind of a pod style book, where the first page is, and I don't know how many people know what pod is. It stands for, sorry about the acronym, Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display. And it's just a specific way of organizing a communication book, where you start with what the intention of the communication is. So you can see here on the top part of the slide, it says communication book, and then there's 9 items, and that's just establishing why I'm communicating. I want to do an activity, I need something, let's do something more in the sort of verb action. I will tell you what I think, something's wrong. So all of those things to scan through, and then you would see if I want activities was chosen, then it tells you to go to page 2, and then she's got a list of some of her favorite things to do, and then you can scan through those. And this was first introduced by modeling, so she wasn't expected just to scan through this entire book and know what all of these things mean, but her family would say, Stella, I have something to say. And then maybe it's like, I think, and then they would go to that page and say, fun, I think this is fun. So they would just model what was in the book and how to use it. And then when Stella started using it, sometimes you can start with like a part model where it'd be like, hey, I think we should play. I want to do an activity. And then because she's been used to those making choices over quite a bit of time, this list might be really familiar to her. So that might be her first foray into scanning using the book. And then eventually she got to know the book and started using it pretty robustly, to the point where as she got a little older, she needed something more robust. And so we had access to an official POD auditory scanning book that had a lot more vocabulary and language, but she'd already been kind of primed for this organization, and she just expanded her use of words. And again, we modeled it first because it was new, okay? Anytime there's something new, we need to model it, so. And then for access in these mid-years, she was great at doing her auditory scanning. She used lots of switches for games. She then used her iPad with Go Talk Now, not so much as a language system, but a little bridge with some fun things that she loved. So she loved at that time in her life animal sounds. I think we did like fart sounds on one page. She really liked a lot of silly sounds. I think she got into telling some jokes. And so she was at this point using 2-switch scanning still. She had her pod book, but her scanning really started to get very good and pretty quick. So she was able to then move to 1-switch auto scan. And so today, Stella always has her switch mounted. She still continues to use her step-by-step a lot. Her light tech pod book is readily available, but just recently she got a PRC accent device. She received it. It took a little while to get it ordered and delivered, but she has it delivered now. And she is using it both in her power chair and in a manual chair. In her manual chair, which you'll see on the right, she has a candy corn proximity switch, and she uses the 1-switch auto scan through her PRC device. And then in her power chair, she has proximity switches in her head array that pair with the device as well. And she continues to use multimodal communication, as I said, but this is what the process was to get her physically ready for a device, but already primed with the language and the motor pattern of switch scanning, etc. So it all came together for her in her device, and we're excited to see where she goes with it. All right, so now I'm going to introduce you to Weston. Weston is, we started seeing Weston when he was about 5 years old. I think Carrie introduced you to Weston in her Access session last month. Here he is with his twin brother. He also has cerebral palsy. His vision is good. He wears some corrective glasses, but his vision is quite strong. And he is now, I think, almost 12. So this is from a few years ago. His school team, so he also has used a step-by-step and some other sequential messages, which he absolutely loves, especially to tease his dad. But his school team found this fabulous app called Telegami that is an avatar. And they basically, for a class presentation, he worked with his one-on-one and planned what he wanted programmed in it and was able to do this presentation. Oops. The volume on this is a bit loud, so I'm gonna just turn my volume down a tiny bit before we start it. Okay.
I'm talking for Weston. My report is about hammerhead sharks. I picked hammerheads because of the weird shape. They can get up to 20 feet long and...
So I won't go through the whole thing, although it is fun to learn facts about hammerhead sharks. Anyways, it goes on for a while. And that was his presentation, which was a really, I mean, I think they may even have offered, once they discovered this for Weston, I think a lot of his classmates wanted the opportunity too. And so this is a nice way to normalize technology too, and maybe have some other kids have the opportunity to create an avatar and to do a presentation in class. So unfortunately, Telegami is not, is no longer supported by the developer, but next week we'll talk about some other options. But Avatar is a fun way for Weston to participate in his class. We were not sure what Weston's access was going to be at the beginning. We were hoping eye gaze might be a good option. So he was working over, he worked really hard at eye gaze for a long time. This is a picture of the fart clouds, part of the Smartbox eye gaze learning software, their games. And he thought these were hilarious, as you can imagine at the time, a 6-year-old boy. And so he worked really hard. He played lots of games on the eye gaze device. He was a young, you know, go-getter, smart little guy. He did not have a lot of tolerance for setting up technology, as I think Carrie shared last time. And so we would just do short spurts, and he worked really hard. And then in the meantime, we also gave him some switch opportunities. And he then, after a lot of hard work, indicated that he just thought that the eye gaze was too frustrating, and he preferred switches. So then we focused, we shifted away from eye gaze, and then again, lots of just fun two-switch step scanning, or two-switch games that eventually became step scanning games. In the meantime, we made sure that his family was making sure that his prescription for his glasses were good. Carrie was working with them on good seating for positioning, and he really, really got good at refining his yes and no. So this is over a period of a while to figure out his access. So in the meantime, again, we don't want to wait for language. And so Weston got a 20-cell visual pod book, which he was amazing at and really got to know the book quite well. Also, if there was something not in the book, his family was really good at giving him just on-the-fly auditory, partner-assisted auditory scanning. And so he had that book wherever he went. So he really got, and he picked it up very quickly. So he had years of opportunity of using his book while we were figuring out this access piece. And then today, he now has a GridPad speech generating device. He also continues to use his pod book, still loves the sequential scripts. Hopefully he's still doing some, we haven't, we were supposed to see him actually in March, but with this, these COVID crisis precautions, they had to cancel, but he has a really great school team. So I'm sure they're continuing to find ways for him to participate and do presentations. And he is really great with his yes, no. So there's lots of choices that he is able to scan through. He does have, you'll see, I think if you saw Carrie's access presentation last month, you will have seen this video. But what you'll notice here is that he also had a pod, basically a pod layout on his speech generating device. And so he is not physically scanning through this here. It's at the end of the day and he's tired. But we just want to point out that even when these pieces do come together and you get the, speech generating device and it all, things seem like they've come together, there's always going to be times where either the technology is not working or somebody's tired or, you're in a different position, but the family's still using the pod layout on the book. It keeps jumping back on me here. Here we go.
Question. Do you have something to say?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay, chat words.
Is it chat words? Greetings or manners?
Yeah.
Greetings or manners?
No.
No. Chat words?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back.
No, I put on showers.
Oh, okay, is it in this row? Me, you, uh-oh?
No.
No. Is it in this row? Hurry up, wait a minute, stop? Yeah? Hurry up? Yeah? Hurry up.
Is it back in cowards?
Are you telling me to hurry up?
No.
Yeah.
So you can see he's still a young guy who wants things to keep on moving. He's saying, hurry up, Mom. He was really primed for that because he knew his language system. He'd worked on that access piece, but you can still see that the partner being a bridge to learning. This is actually when the device was still pretty new. And so his mom and brother were really important bridges for him to learn and explore that device. Because you can operate the machine and you might know the language, but now you have to go through the machine to find out where all of that language is as well. So it's all just a big learning curve, and we often do need to be the bridge to help facilitate that. Okay, and so now Carrie is going to talk about Julie.
Okay, so here's little Miss Julie. I started working with Julie when she was 2 years old, and she is now 20. So right away, right off the bat, we wanted to make sure that Julie had ways to participate in her life. So she got a step-by-step early on to sing songs, make funny sounds. She also had a really nice high hand and a few gestures. So right off the bat, we wanted to make sure day one that she's able to participate with her family and in her preschool. Next. And so for Julie, she has schizencephaly, which is a brain disorder. She also has a seizure disorder and cortical vision impairment. So we knew from the beginning that access was going to be challenging. It wasn't clear in the beginning if she would be able to be a direct selector, where she could use her finger to touch and point to her selections, or if she would need to be an indirect selector using switches. So in the beginning, we just worked on some fun switch games so she could understand the concept of indirect access. In the meantime, she was also working in occupational therapy on her visual motor skills, doing fun, motivating eye-hand coordination activities. So it wasn't clear in the beginning, so we just worked on different access methods. Again, keeping things fun and engaging and self-directed, so that she was choosing her activities herself rather than, an adult telling her what to do or what to select. So she was choosing those activities herself while we were figuring out her access. And at the time, if we had had the iPad, you may remember from the last session, I talked a little bit about CanTunes. There wasn't an iPad back then, if you can imagine, back in the day. So if we had had the iPad, this would have been a great activity for Julie, just to work on her eye-hand coordination with targeting. You can set this app up in different layouts. So here it's set up with 4 cells where it pulls music from your iTunes account. And if you tap one of the circles, it'll start playing the CD. And so for Julie, this would have been a great activity. We could have also put a key guard over it just for her to start practicing, again, that using her eyes and hands together in really an errorless, fun, low pressure activity, again, that's self-directed. So she would choose the music herself. It wouldn't be so much, us telling her what to select, but she could explore music on her own. So this would have been a great activity if we'd had it at the time. So as Kim mentioned early on, since access was a challenging, we didn't want to wait for language. So we really worked with her family and her preschool team on introducing language really early on. So her school team had made a book of visual picture symbols so that Julie could start to learn the concept of symbolic language. And because of her vision impairment, Julie needed to get symbols really close up for her to see them. So she would pull symbols off of, her book and study them really closely. And a lot of times they'd go flying, but she was really starting to learn what is symbolic language. She was also starting to develop her repertoire of sign approximations and a few gestures. And she was developing some verbalization, some vocal sounds. So she was just getting kind of this early base of exposure to language and learning that symbolic language. So as Julie got a little bit older, her vision actually improved. She didn't need to hold things quite so close. She was able to see at more of a distance now. She was also able to start to use her eyes and hands together. So when she was younger, if she went to touch something, she'd often look away. And so using her eyes and hands together was challenging. But as she got older, she was able to bring her hand forward and touch something and maintain visual fixation on that. So that really opened up a lot of possibilities for Julie. And so at school, she was starting trials with a Dynavox device. She could only really access 6 cells, but now she was able to activate, keep her eyes on the device. It had a plastic key guard on it. She still had her book with pull-off symbols, but again, as you can imagine, those symbols are just kind of flying all over. So really the goal is to eventually have just kind of a flat page with symbols on it. And because her access was still a little bit challenging to tell always, exactly which cell on the page she was going for, her mom had this fantastic idea as a bridge in the beginning to make a foam board key guard on each page in her book. So Julie could really feel and make sure, she was in the right cell that she wanted on the page. She still had her step-by-step and used that all the time for participating at home and at school and out in the community. When the iPad did come out, she had lots of fun apps on there, so she could, again, start to practice using her eyes and hands together with tapping on the screen. She started to learn how to swipe. She still had a few vocalizations and gestures, not a lot. It got more challenging as she got older. But as you can see, she's got a repertoire of communication tools that she's building over time. And here, Julie is at 15 years old, really starting to develop that multimodal communication system that she has. So she still has the book with the foam keyboard or key guard that mom had made. She has her own Dynavox that school was able to get for her. As Kim mentioned, and we mentioned before, Tap Speak Sequence is an app that's no longer supported, but it essentially is a step-by-step on an iPad. And so she used that to participate all the time, particularly out in the community. She had call buttons around her house. She had one by the back door that she could tap that says, I want to go outside. She had one by the bathroom that says, I need to go to the bathroom. And when she was about 13 or 14 years old, she was able to develop the skill of really scanning through a list of auditory choices using a yes and no response. When she was younger, she had yes and no symbols, and she could answer some questions with yes and no, but it was still a difficult concept for her. So we just kind of plugged away at it over the years. And again, around 13 or 14, it really clicked for her. And so if her device wasn't available or something wasn't in her device, it was a great option for mom and for school to be able to scan through an auditory list, as Kim mentioned before, and how that works. And so she could tap her yes or her no symbol and go through a list of choices. So that opened up another option for her. Sometimes it's nice to have those no tech options. So when your technology isn't available or it's not working, you have something to fall back on. And again, she had a few gestures and vocalizations as well. So really developing that total communication system. So we'll watch a quick video here. Kim and Julie are doing an art activity together. She's got her Dynavox out and she's got her book on the table if she would like that. There's no sound, Kim. I think you have to unmute you to hear the sound.
Oh, thank you. I was like, I can hear it. Okay, here we go again.
Take a little break and then we'll check your schedule. I like coloring. I do too. I really like coloring with you. We did.
So Julie said, I like coloring. And she has a phrase-based communication system, and that works really well for her. Okay, so as I mentioned over time, those pull-off picture symbols kind of became not so efficient for Julie, and you know, she would drop them, she'd sometimes hand them, and they'd kind of fly all over. So moving towards this flat system where you can have these static pages really made it more efficient for Julie. So she eventually got a pod book, and then instead of having the foam key guard, she didn't need that tactile anymore. Her targeting got better, her eye-hand coordination got better, so she could just have a black background, starting out with the same 6-cell layout that she was used to, working up to a 9-cell over time. So she had access to this pod book with many pages, more robust language. She still had her communication device with her key guard. She had her tap speak app, call buttons in the house, her option to scan through auditory choices, and again, some vocalizations and gestures. So here really is kind of where Julie is today, having lots of options for communication. And as I mentioned, her Dynavox is set up with a phrase-based system that works best for her. And so her mom is really great at programming really fun, meaningful pages for them to use in the community. School has their own kind of section in her Dynavox that they program, and mom programs the community and home pages. And she's just great using her Dynavox, and it's been really meaningful for Julie. It's really based on participation. That's how it's set up for her, is primarily for participation. So we'll kind of bring everything together here and do a quick recap. As Kim mentioned with the communication house, engagement is really the key into building communication for someone, and we need to start with that engagement. And in the beginning, starting day one, thinking of ways where someone could participate in their life and throughout the day. So starting with participation with day one, coming up with some tools to allow someone to be part of their world, and then using those participation tools throughout life, really. In the beginning, we sometimes talk about communication goals, and we sometimes try to pack a lot into communication goals. So we recommend in the beginning pulling apart your access goal and your language goal in the beginning, and keeping those separate. And last time we gave a handout that's posted online giving examples of goals. So feel free to reach out if you have questions about writing goals. And then, as we mentioned last time and this time, keeping access activities really fun and motivating in the beginning, and particularly self-directed. So rather than it being adult-directed or saying, you know, find the cow, or can you find such and such, it's really about the child themselves choosing what they would like, and really having it come from within and being self-directed. And having those early experiences with technology being positive and setting someone up for success with the technology, so they start to have a really positive association with technology, that these tools are cool and they're fun and they do great things for me. And then remembering we can't wait for access to start to learn language early on. So language can't wait. We need to expose to language really early on. So we'll open it up for questions and discussions.
And just,
I won't, there are two questions. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, Hannah, before we launch into the questions, just that you were going to put the evaluation link up there in case anyone has to skedaddle before we're finished with our discussion.
Yes.
So that.
Yes, we just added the evaluation link into our chat box. We're asking everyone to complete that evaluation, and then also that will redirect you to get continuing education hours. But we also have two questions in the chat box from our case studies. I'm going to start with one. I think it was about Weston, and the question was about the trial for him. So you mentioned that you trialed an eye gaze system, and then eventually moved to switches. And so the question was, how long did you trial that eye gaze system for him? And did he have access to that system at home, at school, at clinic? What did that trial period look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a complicating factor for Weston is they live about an hour and a half outside of the city. So in the summers, we could see him a little more intensively, but through the school year, it was more like a consultation. So we really coordinated with his fabulous school team and made sure we were all on the same page. And so they had an eye gaze device at school. And I believe they tried to give him short bursts pretty close to daily. You know, you all know if you're in the schools that sometimes daily is not exactly daily, but they really tried to keep it pretty frequent for him. And we all recognize that the important thing was to have it all set up and ready for him. He could come in, have fun with it for a little while, and then be done with it. Because, and one of the reasons that access method, we stuck with it for quite a while, because there were times where it looked so hopeful, and obviously scanning is so much slower than the direct select you can make with your eyes. And he had fun with the games, but when it really came down to trying to make like a language system in it, some of you might be aware that people with cerebral palsy might have really excellent vision, but the fine motor control of the eyes can be also affected by cerebral palsy. And I think he had a little strabismus as well. He did have glasses to help with that, but it just was a little too challenging for him to be able to hold his eyes on a target for selection. That being said, that doesn't mean that that's not something he might be able to do in the future as he gets a little bit older, and also honestly as the eye gaze technology is getting better. That is still a possibility for him going forward. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
And Hannah, I do see in the chat box some other questions. So I'll address the question about Julie. Somebody asked, was her access method the same for her pod book as for the Dynavox? And I will say the method was the same. So again, it was 6-cell layout. She was very familiar with that, with a key guard. So in the beginning, with her book that mom had made, her communication book, it had the foam keyboard on, or key guard on it. And then when we moved to the actual pod book, she didn't need that foam key guard anymore. So it was just that black background. So from a motor standpoint, we kept it the 6. And mom really wanted to stick with 6 rather than going to the 9-cell pod in the beginning. And then the second question was the pod language system also on the Dynavox? And so that's an excellent question. And that was a very thoughtful process. So I'll let Kim explain about the language system.
Yeah, so so we haven't seen, Julie's seeing somebody else now that we're at the AT lab. She's been seeing a colleague of ours, and I believe she has a new device, and I believe that is exactly what they have done, is then put that organization on her new device. What you saw was the process of, she had actually the Dynavox before the pod system.
It wasn't out yet.
Yeah. And also there were, because she already had things that were working for her, it was a process just working with family and multiple people in a team to have everyone be ready and on the same board for the launching of that pod book. So that just took a little longer to happen. But now I believe that language, so she'll still have her phrase-based stuff for her participation, but the goal was always to also get more robust language on her speech generating device, and I believe that has happened with her new device.
And somebody asked, was it direct access for Julie on the Dynavox and pod? And yes, she was always direct. We tried, again, when she was young, experimenting with some indirect access just to expose her to it, just in case that direct access was just going to be too hard. But she luckily ended up being a direct selector once we moved kind of into those communication tools. And then someone had a great question about Stella. Fantastic.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Because I want to delve into the questions. I just wanted to put up our contact information and say, well, our drop-in hours happen when we're not in shutdown, but so feel free once we're all open again to visit us if you're in the area from Thursdays 12 to 5. And then I'm just going to leave this slide up, and then let's keep going with our questions. So,
yeah, well, someone had an excellent question about Stella, saying wondering why switch use to indicate yes and no for Stella instead of body language or vocalizations. Excellent question. We really were hoping that she could develop a consistent yeah response or some type of vocalization or that body language. But when she was young, and again, this was 2 years old when we started to introduce this concept of scanning through choices. You know, we wanted to expose her very early on and empower her to be able to make choices. And so at that time, because of her, partially because of her cortical vision impairment, there wasn't a clear head response that we tried to shape like a yes or no, but her head often hung down, I think a lot because of her vision impairment. And she would smile sometimes in the affirmative, and we tried to shape that. It just wasn't consistent for her. So early on, it was easier for her to be able to use these yes and no head switches. But luckily, as she got older, she became very consistent with those, and now she doesn't need a switch or anything, and she has a really clear yes, and she will just boom if you ask her a question. And then for her, no is just you do nothing and you keep your head down, and then yes is a big head turn towards her yes side. So that's an excellent question. Obviously in the beginning we would love vocalizations, we would love someone to say yeah like Weston, but if they don't have that, then we start looking at that body language. And if you can't do that, then these yes and no head switches do work well. Or again, in the last session you saw, you can even put one under someone's chin for a yes to start to shape a head nod. So that was an excellent question.
And just to clarify too what Carrie said, because we would even we would normally go for the, you know, this is a yes and this is a no, but because of Stella's her hand use, she would often kind of have a head down, and I believe when she was younger she would probably from her cortical vision impairment, she would move her head a lot, and it just side to side, and so it just ended up being not a functional approach.
Yeah. And I just have to give another plug for Stella. She is an amazing communicator. Early on, again, when we started it too, like even her family couldn't believe that this was even a possibility. And I think they thought we were kind of nuts when we were doing these yes, no choices. It's just, if you could see her, she's amazing and super bright. And so it was a process, and it took a while, but it totally paid off. And so there's a great question about the language system that Stella is using on her PRC device. She does have the pod system book, but in her PRC device, Kim, I'll let you mention, because that was ordered through the hospital system, and I know they were working with school as well. And so I'm not certain of the language system on her PRC device. Kim, I don't know if you know.
Yeah, they're using the PRC. I don't know if they might be doing Empower, maybe because of her switch use, they might be sticking with just the new voice, and it'll be some sort of Unity, but I'm guessing, I haven't said it, she just got it, and she's working with a colleague of ours, and any of the follow-up that we might have been able to do with people kind of in person is just all fallen apart right now, so we haven't been able to see her in the lab. So to be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I believe she's probably starting with maybe the Unity 28 cell. We saw a little video and it kind of looked like there might have been about 28 cells, but what they might have done is they might have a little bit of a bridge of carrying through some of the things she was used to on that light tech system, so maybe some familiar layout while they introduce the 28 cell Unity. But I'll be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure.
And it is mounted behind her wheelchair, so it is just an auditory system for her. The visual component doesn't help her at all, so it's just sitting on her manual chair. They have a place to set it, and then on her power chair, they have a place to set it behind her. And then she has a little pillow speaker that sits on the chair near her ear, so she can hear those auditory prompts with the speaker. And then there is a question about where can I find specific guidelines for how to introduce an auditory scanning book, such as the one that Stella uses. So Kim, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. I guess I'm not totally clear on what you mean by specific guidelines. Are you thinking there's the actual template, what would have the content? I'm not sure if you're looking for guidelines around that.
I think it's how to introduce like what are the steps and what's the process for introducing an auditory scanning book?
Yeah. So first off, even if you're still trying to figure out, what book and what, how you download it, or if you're creating it, you can begin, if I don't know if this is going to specifically answer your question, but just to sort of backtrack, learning how to scan through really familiar choices just at the beginning would just be like the intro of things. So let's say you're working with a child who, has, X, Y, and Z things that they love to do, you would, play those things with them, name them. I don't, if they're with, no, you said auditory scans, so you just name them, and then you might model like, I wonder what we should do, kind of what like Carrie did, and then show how you scan to make a choice, and then let them have some opportunities to scan. And we always do like all good choices, so it's not punitive for the child because they're still trying to figure out how this whole system works. And so then through experience, they will learn how just to scan. And then once you've kind of got a good feeling for that, hopefully you're figuring out what that book might look like. And then it really kind of depends on the book that you introduce. You can always have the book have multiple pages, but you don't have to use all the pages at once. But it's kind of nice to have them there, because then as the child maybe gets used to, say, scanning through an activities page, you can, with that book, then start modeling maybe another page. So it is nice if you can have more than one page in there, so you can be using it with the child while modeling it.
And we're running low on time, but I do want to have you quick mention about Gail Porter's pre-pod pages that we could make available, those two pages. So if you want to mention that, Kim, about those pages where it just lists, those pre-pod pages.
Yeah, it's just a really intro auditory scanning book. We could post them, or you could just email us if you have questions. The tricky thing about just posting it is if you don't get a bit of an explanation about how it works, it can be confusing. So, we can maybe make a note too to try to highlight that during the tool specific session next week or next month as well. Yes, you can use, somebody asked, can we use pod without being certified? And yes, you can't do like a pod training and teach other people how to use it specifically without being certified through Gail Porter. But you can absolutely, I recommend trying to get a little bit of training on it. And I mean, I can train individual people, but I wouldn't like teach a pod class, but person-specific training you can always do, because obviously as therapists we have to do that. But it's always good to, if somebody just gives you a pod system, you're probably not going to know what to do with it, and you might not use it correctly, and then you got to backtrack. So it is good to get a little bit, okay. Okay, so this is a different thing. So yes, I would get a little training, but you do not have to be certified to use it with kids. And then, yes, we will, we can post some of those pre-pod pages.
Yeah, maybe we'll put a little first page blurb on it with a little info, and then people could contact us for more info on how to use those pages.
Yeah, if you have some specific questions, I'm seeing a lot of folks are interested in some of the pod style books. If you will just email us, and then we can figure out specifically what would be the most helpful for you.
And this is a good segue as well. So we will be sending out links to the slides, resources that are mentioned in the presentation. You should get those within the next 2 weeks. If you haven't heard anything from the USED, go ahead and email us. But we will be posting all that. We did that for our first session as well. And so we'll post all of those resources on the USED website. And then our third and final session with Kim and Carrie will be next month. We would love for you all to join us May 14th, a Thursday at 10 o'clock Pacific time. So we are excited to learn more about this topic and delve into some of the specific resources and tools that you both use. So I want to be mindful of our time. It looks like we're right at about 10:59. So thank you both so much for sharing those case studies with us today. I think they were really informative and very helpful in demonstrating some of the topics that we were looking at more closely. So thank you everyone for participating. And we will hope to see you all next month. And please share the recordings with any colleagues that you think might be interested as well.
All right.
Thank you, Kim and Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good month. Take care.